Morning, everyone. I wanted to start off by introducing myself because everyone's heard about me and whatever you read about me, but I need to tell you about me and why I am who I am and what drives me. And that's children and education and putting them first. So the person that you have in front of you is an individual who loves crossword puzzles sometimes, who couldn't get Sudoku well, but I've also really had a love of math and science. And so problem solving, perseverance, critical thinking are all the things that I apply to everything that I do. And I say that because when faced with a problem, most times individuals step back and think of the obvious. But I have to, in my realm of thinking, always go to the farthest point that we could go to. And so what you're seeing today is the early stage of a conversation around how do we provide the children that come to the regional schools with at least the basic educational requirements. And so we're going to walk through the numbers, and I want to remind everyone that it is very, very early in the process, very early. But because from the time I've stepped in, I've heard of the budget as equally as much as I've heard of Cracker Farm's fire alarm. And Cracker Farm's fire alarm has been fixed. So now let's work on the budget. And so our goal with the district team, and I want to stop and thank my team members who are here today, who came to show support and to help with this process. Our goal is to have a draft budget completed by at least late November, early December. And so let's walk through today with me. There's gonna be a lot of questions, write them down. And then I was told as you go off into your smaller town groups, me and the team will be around to answer questions, and then we'll come back together. So where are we? Earlier this year, April 2020, during 2024, this was presented, and these were the scenarios of what it would have meant to have a FTE reduction versus restoring the positions and the significant gaps. And the long story short in this slide is, because this isn't new to you, is the fact that to me, a Band-Aid was placed upon a problem and it just moved the problem down the road. And so now we're facing a much larger problem currently, and I want to get into that. So this year, our processes have changed a bit, where the budget team is working, and what we're working on is what does it cost to run the region. So this is our FY25 projected costs. Well, not FY25 actual costs, right, Shannon and Kate? Thank you. So to run the middle school, you'll see that it takes about $5 million in salaries. This is the staff, and then about $752,000 in operating costs. Right? And this is where we have their supplies and the things that they use to make sure that those wonderful lab lessons go well, and the books that they need, and everything that happens within a school. The same thing for the high school. You notice that a high school is approximately $12 million in salaries, and then we're looking at about $2 million in operating supplies. In terms of the central office and the district office, we have the smaller salary because we have the smaller individuals. We do have some teachers that float through the district. And so we're at about $3 million. And the majority of the central office costs sit in operating. This is where transportation is paid, maintenance is paid. This is where the bulk of the supplies in terms of curricular research and things that move around, this is where it sits in the region. And so, as you can see through this bar chart, majority of spending, the district office is like about 20% staffing, 80% operational costs to run the region. At the high school, this is where the majority of the staffing and is, as well as the middle school, and it's about the flip. And so we started to have some assumptions in what we're doing. Of course, we think about the fact, like what's happening with Chapter 70. We're thinking about our towns assessing their annual 2.5%. We're looking at what are our expenses. For example, we know that there are transportation costs, and this year we're about to send back out our transportation RFP. We know that we're entering in APEA negotiations this year. And so what we recently also found out this week as we were prepping was that our health insurance, when we originally presented, and the number that I presented to the regional committee I believe it was at 2.6. Since that meeting on Tuesday, we met with the IAC, and we were asked to project out at least 13% for health insurance for this year. So that has raised our numbers in terms of the projections and what you're going to see, including what the committee is going to see, because that happened after a committee meeting. And that's why one of the key things, again, I want to repeat is this is a living document for us, because as we go through this process, we are gaining additional things that we assumed originally, because we originally had the assumption at 6% for health insurance. Now we're at a 7% increase over what we've assumed. And so, again, this is early. We will be having more meetings and conversations, but we're looking at that. So we're going to present today 6 scenarios. I'm going to present 6 scenarios that ranges, and we're going to walk through them together and have conversations. So what are we projecting to spend for FY26? $38,475,061. That's what we're projecting in terms of salaries, staff, our projected transportation. This is within our current model. This is with the staffing, this is with the expenses, this is with everything that we currently have. We would have to have $38,475,061 to run the region. The monies that we expect to receive when we add up Chapter 70, our reimbursements, if we look at how we have our, I'm going to say net zero in terms of circuit breaker and everything, we're looking at $12,160. It's on $12,160,589 is what we would receive outside of what the towns would be putting in to the region. I'm going good, Shannon? Good job. All right, so again, I'm recapping. For FY25, we needed 35 million, about 36 million to run the region. And this year, I already said we need about 39. So that's about a $3 million difference with our current model as in place to run the regional schools. So here are the scenarios that we are posing today and we're walking through. Scenario 1, what happens if the towns keep 6% within the base with 4% increase for FY26? We would be at a deficit of 2.2 million, $2,195,226. That's a deficit we would be at, as if all 4 towns kept the 6% within the base of FY25, and we use that with an additional 4% for FY26. So just recapping what that number is. What happened? What happens in scenario 2? This is scenario 2. What happens if the towns keep 6% within the base with a 2.5% increase for FY26? We would operate at a $2,543,100 deficit. This is if all 4 towns kept the 6% and only increased by the 2.5%. Give me a minute to write it down. We're good. Scenario 3, what happens if the towns reduced FY25 back to the 4% base and increased by 4%? So technically, that what you would do is take back 0.5% would be 0.5 around there. You understand? It would be. We're good. Okay, so we would be at a $2,650,306 deficit. This is if all 4 towns reverted back to 4% in the base and only increased this year by 4%. Scenario 4, what happens if the towns reduce FY25 to a 4% base and increase only by 3%. Now I just want you to see how we're working all of the possibilities and scenarios, and we want to present all of the possibilities and scenarios to you so that as we talk and go through this process, you're aware of where we are. Um, and I'm going to say something at the end when we reach to scenario 6. So if this happens, if all towns reduce to 4 and only increase 3% this year, we would be at a negative $2,877,846 deficit. Scenario 5, what happens if the towns remove 2% from the base? So again, we revert back to the 4% and only increase to 2.5%. We would be at a $2,991,616 deficit. Scenario 6, what happens if all 4 towns only provide 2.5 in the base and increase by 2.5 for FY26? We would be at a negative $3,328,004 deficit. So these are our 6 scenarios that we're posing today. And we've began to plan, because the one thing, again, I started off by saying the type of person that I am, is that when faced with a situation, I look at all of the facts and the data. And it is evident that regardless of what we do, we are going to be operating at a deficit. It is for us to determine how can we best operate, where regardless whatever the scenario is, we are at a severe fiscal deficit. So I'm very evidence and research based, and I don't feel like I have to read this quote to everyone, but I might read it for those who are online. And it says, to address the current funding crisis, we must move away from the outdated level service and line item budgeting practices. Performance-based budgeting allows us to align financial resources with educational outcomes, creating a clear pathway for restructuring the system and ensuring that every dollar is used effectively to support student achievement. This is from Eric Scorsoni, a doctor in economist and public finance expert. And I need to say this because what was being done in terms of level services, in my opinion, humble as it is, was not the method being done correctly in what we need to have happen. And what we are trying and attempting to do now is shift to a line item budgeting process. However, we are in transition, and still you can see where the gaps are. Essentially, as a school system, we need to be using a performance-based budgeting model. However, it's going to take some shifts and steps. Step 1, we need to move from level services to line item budgeting, transitioning. So that's what we are working on this year. Shannon, Kate, the budget office has been working with that to make sure that we are shifting out of overlooking inefficiencies in the current budgeting model and addressing the ever-changing needs of students by now coming into the fact in looking into categories. But line item is not where we have to stay, because it doesn't work for an educational system. So we then need to shift to performance-based budgeting and tie our financial decisions to student outcomes. We need to make sure that we are clear on what our attendance rates are going to be, our graduation rates intend to be, what are the outcomes we want for students that go to school within the region. And we have to make sure that we create a clear pathway for restructuring the region so that we can meet our financial gaps, as well as we can meet the needs of students, putting students first. And essentially, we need to shift to get out of our funding crisis. Because based on the state's equations and the numbers that we get from the state, really the onus and burden ends up resting with the towns. And as hard as you work to ensure that you are funding, we are ever clearly, consistently in a gap and crisis. So I understand. I sat through my first BCG meeting this week. And so I understand that there's a lot of weight that rests with the towns. And I read a book, I saw a movie where it says, basically Superman isn't coming, there isn't a white knight. Really, to create the educational system, it rests within this room for us to determine what's the best possible way to move forward. And so my team and I have created these scenarios as a realistic starting point to our discussion of where the region will need to go for us to at least provide a basic educational system and structure for our students. So how can we restructure? On Tuesday evening, the regional committee asked me to create the hypotheticals, talk about what it could be, and what is it going to look like. As we started to shift numbers, I pulled a small core team together, and the reality of it was it's not 1.8, it's 2.1. So where we thought we could just shift certain costs, we can't. So if we look at our old model, we'll start off with a consolidation of the central office, reduction of staff, at least 3, with a $250,000 savings, as well as looking at other district savings. And then the reduction of staff will also increase our reduction at the central office because we would now have less health insurance being paid in. So we're looking upwards of around $300,000. And the fact that we would also go in very hard at the central office, working within our negotiations, one, looking at our transportation RFP to ensure that we're within a certain range and budget. So we're going to look at reduction of transportation costs, as well as looking at our scheduling of staff members in terms of reduction of overtime. And so we're looking at starting in the central office first to create cuts there. We would shift the Amherst Regional ideally to a 7-12 model in one building, and have to consolidate building leadership. And remember, these are just scenarios that we're posing. However, I need you to understand at the end, you'll see at the end why we're posing it this way. If we consolidate building leadership in a new model, we would have 5 building leaders. It will be a regional reduction of about 1 building leader. We're estimating around 100,000 in that reduction. We would have to consolidate our professional staff. We have 15 at the region right now. We were reduced by 3 professional staff members. Estimated savings are around $230,000 approximately at the region. We would consolidate our 15 clerical staff. We would have to go down to 9 clerical positions. That would be a reduction of about 6 clerical, looking at a savings of $316,000. We will consolidate from 14 maintenance and custodial staff down to 8 because we will be functioning out of one, really the schools will be functioning out of one building. It will be one 7-12 regional school. And so that would be a savings of around $267,000. We would say we would have a reduction in additional pay, stipends over time. We're looking at how do we shift the model to have that when we shift into one. So that would be a reduction of about $26,000. We would consolidate our general and special education staff. And so that would be a reduction of 12 professional positions, 6 support staff positions. That in itself is $1.1 million. The total potential savings that we have come up with in consolidating into a 7-12 model operating out of the regional school would be a total potential savings of 2.3, I'm going to just round up and say $2.4 million. We've also flushed out alternative cost ideas. If we furlough all staff for 1 day, that could equate about $80,000. If we look at our HMO premium and we shifted from an 80% to a 75-25 model. That's approximately $140,000 that we would save. And like I said, we also have to take into account our APEA negotiations, which we have to account for what that COLA, cost of living increase would be, and then our transportation RFP as well for the upcoming years. So again, we go back to our scenarios. And what we did is we placed our potential savings within the scenarios to see which would be the best possible scenario that we could operate from. I believe my team has this, so when you are ready to meet out, they will give this to you so you can see. So scenario 1, you'll see that we would actually, and that was the scenario where if the towns kept the 6% with a 4% increase, with our potential savings of the consolidation into a 712, we would actually have a surplus of $178,457.44. Scenario 2, if all towns kept the base at 6% with a 2.5% increase for FY26, even with our potential savings, we would still have a deficit of $169,416.30. Scenario 3, with 4% in the base for FY25, 4% increase for FY26, with our potential savings, we would still have a deficit of $277,000. And I can go through this, but you're going to have it. So as you can see, we've also ran the scenarios with the potential savings. So it was evident to me, and it's evident to everyone, and I've committed to transparency and honesty. This is the reality of the scenarios we're facing. Regardless of what it is, cuts are going to have to be made. That is the reality. And as you can see, we started from the top and we're going straight. Like, it's not just student facing. It is all positions, all areas are going to have to experience cuts within the region. It's all about what is the best versus the worst scenario. So for us, scenario 1 is the best possible scenario because there is a surplus that is there that we can probably have some wiggle room to restore a couple of positions. We have some wiggle room to make sure transportation costs are there. As you know, we have to maintain certain buildings. There are things that have to be done. The question that resonated with the team was, okay, if we consolidate into a 712, what are we doing with the middle school building, right? And we flushed out some ideas, but we can't finalize some ideas at this point because one of the things that we saw, and when we talk about this, there are 2 critical things that affect our budget. 1, school choice, the students that we choice out and we lose. 2, special education. Special education in this district is $2.5 million over budget. Children that we receive, even children that choice in, because we have great special education services, we receive $5,000, but we expend in special education services about $100,000 to $200,000 per student. So we're also looking at whether or not we're going to be having choice this year. Maybe we may have to pause choice programmatically. Remember, if we shift a performance-based budgeting model, we're looking at student outcomes, and that's why we have to kind of take the progression and move across. So we're also looking at student. So then the conversation shifted to school choice. Kate, give me the correct number. But this $2.2 million deficit, we spent about $2.3 million school choicing students out of the region. Thank you to charter. Thank you, Kate. So we spent about 2.5 or so sending students who would have been in the region to charter schools. That is our deficit. So it is time for us to look at how do we create programming to retain our students within the region and to bring students in to the region. So the team has started having conversations, again, as we were working the past few days around this. It's really been like, what's out there, what's offered. So for example, DESE offers schools the opportunity to file to be an innovation school, right? Okay, you can convert, you can create a new one. We've been researching what are the reasons why students leave. They leave because of voc tech. They leave because we don't have certain programs that they want. We don't have the digital, the gaming. So we really need to start. But again, this is early in the conversation. I haven't even had the conversation with the regional committee as yet to present. But we really need to start looking. So consolidating to a 712 in one building provides us the space to create an innovative school that could be 712 in another building and return students to the region. But this building needs work. So even as it is right now, there is work that needs to be done in terms of the deferred maintenance. But we'll get there when we talk capital, and I'm not ready to talk capital today. So my team, our team will continue to move forward with planning for the future of the region. Our children deserve the best, but can we at least agree today to give them basic? And so I know you may have questions, but I think at this time we transition to our smaller groups and then we come back together. Okay.
I mean, may I suggest that, because we go to the smaller groups, all these other questions people are going to be asking, we won't know. Can we take at least 10, 15 minutes to have general questions from the audience before we break into smaller groups?
Are there clarifying questions? Oh boy, okay. Can we do some clarifying questions and then we'll, right. All right. Shannon, you coming up?
What we can do is while the team hands out the folders, we'll take questions and then I'm sure everyone may want to go back and write down.
Is it reasonable to move the middle school to the high school this year? Number one. Second, have you had any discussions with the charter school to determine whether maybe they could use the middle school and do some joint programming with us, bringing innovation to our town? And then there's many more questions, but I'm going to ask if others from Amherst have.
So can I have opportunity to answer that as you transition over? And I'm hoping that my team is right. I know they're handing out, but I'm hoping somebody's writing the questions. So one, Lynn, like I said, this isn't fully flushed out. And so we started this week. We started with the scenarios for the budgeting and what it's gonna look like. We have to plan more. And so I'm hoping that by November, December, we can have a clearer plan of what that transition would take, what it's going to look like. I would prefer not to have a conversation with the charter school. I would prefer us to survey the students, survey them in the community, see what they would want to do. I would firmly believe that versus renting the building, using our building and creating our own programming adds to our marketing of who we are and what we are able to offer our children. So the second question is I'm not going to at all. I have a very strong team, but the first question, everything is brand new. It's conversation that we had, and we wanted to be realistic in what are we going to do to offer at least the basic with the cuts that we're facing.
Hi, Mandy Jo Haneke. I'm with the Town Council in Amherst. On your scenarios, you say on on all six of them with a 4% increase or a 2% increase or a 3% increase. Is that across the board without regard to the assessment method and the split up of assessment method, so that every town would face that same increase? Or are you looking at the various distributions based on 100% statutory method so that some might be higher than 4, but some might be lower, say I'm picking 4 here, and some might hit 4, so that the overall is 4?
So if you remember in previous years, there was a spreadsheet. Oh, okay. In previous years, there was a spreadsheet that we had with 2 blue columns, and we kind of started on one side and it went in a U shape. When I plugged in what our current expenses are in that sheet, everybody hits the guardrail. So this planning was not to there was no point to adjust any more there. We had to present it this way because everybody's facing that guardrail. So with our scenarios, we came up with scenarios for equal amount per town. We can certainly discuss further and adjust, and this was just very preliminary.
Thank you.
I wanted to say, first of all, thank you for this presentation, including going back to thinking, let's look at from the base up. Pardon? Oh, who am I? I'm Kathy Shane. I'm here on the town council. I'm also on the finance committee of the town. So when you use the word charter, the other question I have about charter is we're sending a huge amount out to the charter compared to school choice for public. And I'd be willing to work with you to start to put more pressure on the state with an analysis of that, because that's one of the drains, and I know we have a state rep here. So that's one issue on how much we send out per student to the charter versus what they spend and who they take. So the second is our sixth grade is scheduled to move up. And I saw in the paper that maybe moving up sooner rather than later was being discussed because of space issues at Fort River. But in thinking about the middle school building, having the sixth grade in the middle school was what had been foreseen. And one of the potentials, at least I thought one of the potentials, is many of the sixth graders might be ready for language classes, might be ready for some higher level math classes. So some of what is being taught to seventh graders could be also have sixth graders enrolled rather than have them be completely separate. So are you thinking through what that education program might be for the sixth grade?
Yes. So in our discussion this week, and again, we didn't get to work all of the numbers. What we did see is that with the sixth grade move, even if we move the sixth grade this year, there would be potential savings on the region, but not as impactful. And so what we would do is that we would look at current Fort River, look at the ratio within the classes. We have to have that discussion, walk it through. And again, this is why this is conversation one. So we're going to continue through. Look at the current ratios, and then determine if the sixth grade can stay, because that's a real concern for me, Fort River. In terms of moving them here, it would still allow for the sixth grade to move in on time for FY26. It would also allow us the opportunity to lay out the building so that it flows clearly. And then in terms of curriculum, we do think that it can create the opportunity where they have the sixth grade academy and kind of benefit from the same content teachers that would be here at the region. However, that benefit would not have yielded us a cost savings enough to hit our deficits for this upcoming year.
Nancy Grossman, Leverett Finance Committee. I thank you for all of this early thinking and sketching all of this out. It's very helpful. I also had a question about the sixth grade. I'm a little confused about where they would go. I mean, I support them staying in an elementary school, but if there's not room, there's not room. So, and also, is there enough room in the high school for all of a sudden the middle school to move over?
So, question number one, again, early. So, we are going where they were going here. I know there was an intended plan for where they would go in this building, sixth grade. However, with the new model or shifting towards the new model, we can actually create like a sixth grade segregated academy wing where they're actually by themselves. But we haven't laid that out as yet. The second conversation in terms of the space at the high school, based on Massachusetts law and our occupancy, the high school can occupy 3,000, which means that 3,000 individuals can exit safely. However, we looked at our projected numbers and we compared our projection from IT to NESDEC. So we are projecting in school year 25 that we would have approximately 1,172 students at the region in terms of middle school and high school. And so we are saying that we can hold the student population in the building. We would just have to work to lay it out. It is, again, early. We're just looking at early numbers. We haven't flushed everything out in terms of placing, like we haven't done that. This has been a me and my team from Tuesday night after school committee to today, up to last night, really hashing and moving things around. You're welcome.
Hi, I'm Bethany Seeger, also part of the Leverett Finance Committee. Also sat in that seat at one point in time over the years. Just a note too that when we talk about sixth graders, we're not talking about Leverett and Shutesbury sixth graders.
Noted. I know.
So no, I know you know. Just for general clarification. Or Pelham. Sorry,
Pelham.
thank you. My question is more just understanding when you say terms like 712, these different models you've thrown out. I don't understand what those mean. So when you bring those up, if you could clarify those, that would be great. Thank you.
Okay. So in terms of 712 is having 7th grade through 12th grade in one school. So it would be kind of like Hampshire Regional, Frontier Regional. It'll be Amherst Regional School.
Jeremy Mayu. I'm on the Shutesbury School Committee. I'm just curious about two things. One is what the furlough model would look like, how that would work contractually, and like how you'd implement that. And secondly, just a little bit about your thinking of why we might be able to save on transportation if we're having to go through the contract again this year, considering things are not trending cheaper. Is there a reason why you might think that there might be some savings there?
So in terms of the transportation, a couple of things that we were going to look at is how can we shift one of the higher costs that we pay in transportation is also our special education transportation. And so looking at it, can we now do that in-house versus contracting that out and what that cost would be. We're also looking at the fact that it will be less mileage because everyone is going to one building, and then also reconsidering how much door-to-door stops we have. Some houses, it's like within a mile, like what's within a mile range between the stop. Some areas we can't do it because the homes are a mile apart, but then there's some where we can reduce the number of door-to-door stops. So we're looking at those different aspects in terms of the conversation. Again, it's real early, so that's the idea of it. We're reducing the stops. Right now, our middle schoolers and high schoolers ride the same bus, so they would just be going to one stop, pick up from one stop. We're also looking at how can we stagger our schedule to reduce the amount of time and overtime that we pay. Because of how our schedules run now, we pay overtime to our drivers because of the pickup time. So there's a lot of nuances that we would have to walk through to see what our real savings would be with transportation. And because things are not going down, we're like the cost and everything economically is rising, we're trying to see if we kind of reduce just enough, if we can stay within the range of where we're at and not hit that projected 10% that we're projecting it to be. And then your first question was furloughs. That's you. You did the numbers.
Oh.
How would it look, or how? We would have to negotiate with all unions and get them to agree. Committee action, it would really be for me to say, hey guys, we're taking one day. I think the conversation, the consensus is not work one day versus not having a job is really something that we could have in terms of committee action. But in terms of whether or not unionized employees, that's why it's a kind of an additional. That's why we didn't build it into our overarching savings, because we know that we would have to go back and negotiate and get all of the unions to agree to that. Oh, so Jen, committee action are, I'm going to say exempt, but that's not going to help. Thank you. Yes. Mr. Fanning, right? Yes.
Mr. Fanning from Pelham.
Yes.
How do you plan to determine student outcomes?
Oh, well, I'm data driven, one. So the intent is first we look at what DESE requires. What are we supposed to move in terms of proficiency? And then we gear towards, for some students, and for me, long term is the interest. Where do they want to be, and where do they see themselves? And so there's various things. We know that there's a base for attendance. If a student is absent 18 days out of the school year, the research says one thing, but the law is that that's the most number of absences a student can have. And so we want to make sure that our absences are less than 10. We want to make sure that we're looking at where each child needs to be. Again, what are the standards? What are our proficiency, our cut scores? And that's how we're going to determine basic student outcomes. In terms of long-term student outcomes, I prefer to work with students to build on their goals. That helps us to direct them through a pathway so that they can feel like this is for them. Our children today, our Gen Z and Gen Alpha, are microwave students. I say they're students who want it now, want it fast, and they want it to be relevant. They want their voices to be heard. And so I would like to say, outside of what we say is a proficient score, and we're saying we're doing well, I would like to say, hearing them say that my goal is to be an engineer, my goal is to be a mechanic, my goal is to, be in agricultural science and develop a new strain, then our goal is to make sure that that student takes a path that's going to get them to where they need to be. So I can talk about state scores, MCAS scores. That's one thing. That's what DESE requires. That's what the state requires. But I also want us to think about the fact that the only way that we get MCAS scores or we get students to engage in learning is when it's relevant to them. And we put them on a pathway that they are now engaging in learning that is relevant to what they see themselves or who they see themselves being in the future. It's going to translate into increased MCAS scores. It's going to translate into proficient students who write well. But we have to make sure that the primary outcome is meeting their needs.
Okay, excellent.
Yeah, you can transition.
Yep. So thank you all very much. We can all break into our towns for a little bit.
Thinking outside the box. Who knows where it'll go? I really appreciate the thoughts. What do you mean? I totally appreciate it.
John Tricky wanted me to, he spoke very highly of you and wanted me to. He's good, he couldn't be here today.
Emily, you're on Finance Committee also.
Nice to meet you too.
All right, thank you guys all so much for all of the conversations we've had. I'm sure there was lots of good conversations in between our towns. I know my town had some good conversation. Are there any follow-up questions? Taking in mind these are all very preliminary steps, so details are going to be hard to answer when these are ideas that are, just beginning to percolate.
Do you just want follow-up questions or
Town steps.
Yeah.
Yeah. Town steps. Sure. Yes.
Something that we talked about was the need for more data to look at some point. We talked about the school choice numbers. We had talked about enrollment trends and teacher population is not the term, but FTEs counts for the past 5 years up until now. So I think there was a desire for all the Excel spreadsheets that you can get us, just to try to notice what those trends are and where and how they're looking.
Okay.
And if I missed anything about the specific demographics that folks wanted to ask.
Could people use microphones for
sorry,
the recording in particular?
Anna mentions a couple that came up. First of all, we'd like to understand how this model fits with the guardrail model and how that is going to continue, or what are you proposing with regard to the models that either the state will honor or we have done. We mentioned that we'd like about a 5-year retrospect on students and maybe even 20 years on that, because we understand the student population has changed. There's more ESL students, etc. And I think that's part of what we need to understand, not that we make your decisions. The town council does not. The school committee does. But the other piece that is also the head count for teachers and how that has changed. And then the model you're going to use for special ed, because the present model at least from the elementary school, was to bring in kids with greater needs and serve them in district? And did that model go on to the high school? And is that part of what needs to be looked at the special ed level? The other thing is that in looking at the move to the high school, what is the actual model for 7 to 12? Is it because the 2019 study, I guess, kept the 7th and 8th grade kind of as a school within a school versus a total 7 to 12? And then, yeah, yeah. Versus, is it still a kind of a 7th and 8th contained, or is it just a straight 7 to 12? The data on school choice was mentioned earlier, and what does that really look like? Which students come from out of district, which students bring additional money with them, and then also we do understand the drain on the district for charter, which I gather we have no choice over. And I'm sorry?
Just
Yeah.
when you're done, just when you're
So just so that to answer one question so that you can see where our mindset was, and I'm trying to bring it up as slowly as possible. I don't want to stay in a long conversation. We did go back 5 years, and I'm hoping this is a touch screen. Is it? Nope. Okay. All right. Can we go down? That's Amherst. Sorry. Trying to scroll here. I want to get to the region. Where is it? Okay, here's the region. 2020, there was 1,346 students, 157 teachers, 80 paraprofessionals. The ratio was 9 students to 1 teacher, 14 students to 1 paraprofessional. Right now in 2024, we're at 1271, 164, 75 paraprofessionals, 8 students to 1. So we're actually, when we had a larger population, we had a smaller number of teachers than we have now. We know that since the pandemic, there are things to take into consideration in terms of student needs and what's happening. This includes all of our gen ed and special education teaching population. So I just want you to know that to build this in the past few days, we have been having the conversations, as well as we looked at our projections for the region. And these are, I think I have to bring this to make it smaller so you can see it. Let me see about 90% where it's gonna look. Good, can you see? Okay. Okay, so here we go. So this is, we're projecting out. And so what you'll see is that this is our high school at the top, and this is our middle school. And projecting out, our population is going to decline. And so we actually have been running the numbers. Let me show you that in a chart. And so here is the region right down here in terms of the middle school and the high school. This is where we're currently at, and you'll see next year we're continuing to decline in our populations. So we do have the beginning data that has been requested. So because we've used that to kind of build out and start looking at what we needed. And we can get the rest as we hash out. We can work on the rest for our next 4 towns meeting.
I just want to add 2 other comments, if you don't mind. First of all, I think we all owe you a huge thank you for getting us started. You've given us something. One of the questions we were going to ask is, how are you thinking about that? And that's what you've done today, is you've given us, how are we thinking about this? We wouldn't have otherwise had a good conversation today, and we have. So thank you so much. May we continue to give you questions by email? Yeah. Yeah, that's fine.
So
no more. Can I make one quick suggestion as we move forward? Talking about budgets or where our ranking is in the schools, and part of my voice, I'm impacted viscerally by things. And part of the conversation I heard us having was about special ed and English language learners in a way that felt like we're on the path to scapegoating or dehumanizing. And I just want to caution us all to be very child-centered, student-centered, human being first, and not whatever might cost us more because there's some accommodations. So thank you.
Thank you. Any further towns, follow-ups? All right. Oh, Deb.
I don't have a question, I just want an observation.
So whenever you're. Okay. So we had Amherst, Leverett. Questions, next steps, follow-ups? Excellent. Thank you.
Phil Carter, Leverett Finance Committee. We don't really have a question. We have some comments. There's a general feeling among all of us that we shouldn't be talking about a 6% base or a 4% base or a 2.5% base. We have just one base. We have a budget this year, and that's what the base is. So we think that that's what we should be talking about, just the base of the current year budget. That is the base for all future budgets. And also, I think there was a general feeling that we lean towards more scenarios 1 and 2 rather than other scenarios. It would be comfortable with scenarios 1 and 2. We would not be comfortable with some of the 4, 5, and 6 scenarios.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Shutesbury?
I think the questions raised by Amherst are the ones that we have, especially the how the guardrail model and the assessment model will play out. But these are all questions because we're at the beginning and we haven't seen how our projections for revenues for FY25 have come in yet. We'll see them as they develop. It's early to have those discussions. It's early to peg our reaction to those to things like base budgets until we know more how our budget's playing out, and we appreciate the work you've done.
Thank you. Pelham, come on.
Hi, I'm Kara with the Finance Committee. Our chair couldn't be here today, so we may have some follow-up questions we could email you. But for now, we just want to say thank you for all your hard work and innovation. We're open to what you have to offer, and we'll continue to support the region as much as we can. Thanks.
Yes.
So George Abernathy's Finance Committee, Shutesbury. The one other thing, we agree with what Leverett has said. We really want to lean towards scenario 1 and 2. We know it's early. There's a lot to be hashed out and a lot figured out, but we really think the base is the base. I will add that, last year Shutesbury voted for a 6% increase, and well, I'm probably getting a little personal here. I don't like cliffs. I know that the situation is not good, and we just wanted that base to make sure that at least we were at a slightly higher position for future years, and I think it would be a mistake to step back from that in light of the cuts we have.
Thank you all very much. Yep, Andy Joe.
Sorry, one thing, I think Lynn touched on it, so when Amherst voted a 6% budget last June, only 4% was in its revenues. The other 2% came out of one-time ARPA funds, which is the same problem that the school committee had been doing for the last couple of years in terms of using ESSER funds to support the operating budget. It's one of the reasons we would have a really hard time putting that extra $360,000 into a budget this year. And I'm not sure the other towns realized that's how Amherst funded that additional 2%. What our budget coordinating group meeting showed yesterday, that in order to get from a 4% base with a 2.5% increase to a 6% base with a 4% increase, the elementary school, either the elementary school or the municipality's funding would need to be level funded, not level services. That extra 600 to 700,000 would mean that either the elementary school or the municipal faces no increase in funding in the FY26 budget. So what the town council needs to look at, which will be very difficult and difficult conversations, is basically where of the three major sectors do those cuts occur, because the money's not there. Well, there's a fourth sector, but it's very tiny, the library sector. But
Hi, I'm Deb Leonard. I'm from Amherst, also on the region. I want to thank everybody for coming. I know that it's easier to Zoom, especially on a Saturday, but I think we have conversations and interactions that benefit me from being in this room together. So I super appreciate that. I look forward to the next one, which is interesting because the April one was traumatic for me. And so I hope the nature of this conversation and the tone is something that we can continue to carry forward. In particular, when we do have these remote meetings, I would ask folks to think a little bit about tone, because the Thursday meeting, the BCG meeting, had a very different flavor, and I came in an entirely different mood than I'm leaving today. So thank you for coming in and being willing to be productive, but when you go back, just really think carefully about that layer of depth, because there's a lot of people involved. Thank you.
Herb, did you have your hand up?
These kinds of conversations are really great to have in the beginning because they don't get any easier. All right, I mean, they just don't. And budgets for families, for institutions, especially when you're talking about deficit situations, are not easy. They're really, really difficult and hard. And I think one of the things that I am really thankful for and I really appreciate is that Dr. Z has presented an enormous amount of great data. You know, not conjecture, but data. And that's data that we can take back to look at. I understand what you just said, Mandy. All right, and definitely we as the school committee will take that to heart. But we will also look at it in such a way as to say, hey, how do we go forward, town council and the school committee, to solve this problem? We're not here to make more problems. We're here to solve problems. So I want us to be able to go together down this road, which is difficult, in a positive manner where we're doing it to solve a problem. And I really appreciate the presence of all of you, and it's been a really great, productive meeting, and I thank you very much.
So I wanted to say it's my first Four Towns meeting and I survived. Thank you, everyone. This is our first conversation. We look forward to having a deeper conversation probably in November or December, so we can continue this. We will definitely work to get you the data that you've asked for. Give us some time. And as we continue to hash out and plan, we will continue to be transparent and share and just see where the numbers take us. Thank you so much for coming.